Our newscast tonight, a recent survey shows that South Koreans believe that improving inter-Korean ties are a top foreign policy priority, and 80% of respondents believe summit talks should be held. And South Korea's Unification Ministry plans to ask all South Korean firms at the Kaesong Industrial Complex to stay firm on current wages for North Korean workers. Giving in to the North's unilateral demand for a workers' pay hike will be penalized. And Korea's exports contribution to growth falls to a 5-year low in 2014. Sluggish demand abroad and falling global oil prices are partially to blame, but the government plans to devise measures to counter that trend. Stay with us for these stories and more.
It's Thursday, April 2nd here in Seoul. You're watching Early Edition at 6. I'm Laah Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us. In her third year in office, President Park Geun-hye has a number of issues to resolve on the diplomatic front, including deadlocked inter-Korean ties.
That's right. Arirang's presidential office correspondent Choi Yoo-sun starts us off this evening by telling us which issues are most important to the Korean public.
In a recent survey of 1,000 adults conducted by local daily The Donga-ilbo and the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, 27% of respondents said improving inter-Korean relations should be the administration's #1 foreign policy priority. More than 80% said President Park should hold summit talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Even 3/4 of those who consider themselves to be politically conservative, often hardliners when it comes to North Korea, said an inter-Korean summit was necessary. Analysts say this reflects South Korean fatigue after 2 years of deadlock and no tangible outcome from the country's North Korea policies. Additionally, 40% of those surveyed said Seoul should lift commercial sanctions on Pyongyang. The sanctions were imposed after the North's torpedo attack on a South Korean warship in 2010. While it remains a sensitive issue, support for the lifting of sanctions jumped 10 percentage points in 5 months. Still, people thought it was necessary to maintain strong deterrence against North Korea's provocations, with 60% saying Seoul should employ the U.S. anti-ballistic missile system THAAD to counter security threats from Pyongyang. Moving down the priority list, South Koreans felt that Seoul's alliance with Washington and its economic partnership with Beijing deserved attention. As for Seoul's frosty relations with Tokyo, 2/3 of Korean people said the two sides should work to improve ties even if Japan continues to deny its past atrocities. Respondents said better relations with Japan are necessary to settle historical issues and to reduce economic fallout. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News.
And staying with inter-Korean affairs, tensions are rising over North Korea's unilateral demand for a pay raise at the joint Kaesong Industrial Complex.
The South Korean government called for a wage freeze until an inter-Korean agreement is reached, warning of legal measures against companies that disregard the order. Our Hwang Sung-yi reports.
In a statement on Thursday in Seoul, the Unification Ministry asked for a minimum wage freeze for North Korean workers until a deal is reached between the two Koreas. The ministry warned that companies ignoring the freeze could face administrative and legal measures under the Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Act. The statement comes just over a week before payday for the workers starts on April 10th. Last month, North Korea demanded a unilateral pay raise and revision of 13 regulations, including scrapping the current salary cap of 5%. South Korea says these issues must be settled through government-level talks. The wage tussle is raising concerns that another unilateral shutdown of the complex could follow. But experts say Pyongyang will refrain from repeating the closure it initiated 2 years ago.
If the Kaesong Industrial Complex closes again, it'll be hard to turn inter-Korean relations around. So it's highly likely that North Korea will use it as a means to intimidate and pressure South Korea.
The Kaesong Industrial Complex, where more than 54,000 North Koreans work at 124 South Korean companies, is the last remaining form of inter-Korean cooperation. A high-ranking South Korean official said that the best way to improve the management of the joint business park is to open it up to more foreign companies. Now, both sides agreed to that measure nearly 2 years ago, but little progress has been made so far. 황상희, Arirang News.
Speculation is mounting over the possible deployment of the U.S. Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, also known as THAAD, to the Korean Peninsula. This as the South Korean and American defense chiefs are set to meet in Seoul next week. Connie Kim reports.
Will they or won't they? With around a week remaining until U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter arrives in Seoul for talks with his South Korean counterpart Han Min-gu, the elephant in the room is whether they touch upon the possible deployment to the Korean Peninsula of the U.S. missile defense system called THAAD.
The U.S. government has not formally proposed talks on that. If Carter suggests official discussions, it becomes a political issue. Seoul and Washington will then be pressed to make a decision.
Some observers believe a bigger issue needs to be addressed before the U.S. proposes talks about THAAD. Experts say that Seoul and Washington would have to agree on the severity of the North Korean nuclear threat in order for THAAD talks to proceed.
Budget sequestration in the U.S. meant defense spending was cut. The U.S. believes North Korea has scaled up its nuclear threat, so the Pentagon says it needs more funds. The South Korean government, on the hand, is not keen on increasing its defense budget.
Other experts think THAAD is unlikely to come up during Carter's visit.
China's reaction on the THAAD issue, very controversial. I don't think he's going to raise any controversial issues at all. Rather, he will say the U.S. commitment to the defense of South Korea.
China and Russia say THAAD threatens their national security because the system's radar has a range of up to 2,000 kilometers, meaning it would cover significant parts of their mainland territories. Sandwiched between Beijing and Washington, observers say Seoul must make its own objective decision and not be swayed by the superpowers. However, until official talks on THAAD materialize, the two countries will focus on trying to find common ground on security, military, and diplomatic issues at upcoming defense talks in Washington and Singapore. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
In the meantime, Russia has voiced its concerns once again. Moscow's ambassador to Seoul says the THAAD deployment would become a regional security threat if it becomes a reality. In her interview with Korea's Yonhap News Agency on Thursday, Alexander Timonin said the U.S. missile defense system would destabilize the entire region. The envoy also warned THAAD could spark an arms race in Northeast Asia and complicate the resolution of North Korea's nuclear issues. He called on Seoul to carefully review the system to see if it will end up having more negative than positive outcomes. Meanwhile, the U.S. defense contractor that developed THAAD has reportedly been providing information about the system to the Korean government. A representative of Lockheed Martin told the New York Times that it has been supplying information to Korea and the U.S. as there's a possibility Seoul might purchase the system. But Korea's defense ministry denied that claim today, saying it has not received any specific data. The ministry says back in 2013, one of its agencies requested information on THAAD for research purposes, but ended up not receiving any materials.
Outside of Korea, no breakthrough yet, only postponements in the talks on Iran's nuclear program. 2 days have passed since their self-imposed Tuesday deadline, and the six world powers and Iran are not able to see eye to eye on the final document.
That they need to exhibit political will and flexibility in order to move forward. Iran has exhibited that political will. Iran has shown its readiness to engage with dignity.
But if we are in a situation where we sense that the talks have stalled, then yes, the United States and the international community is prepared to walk away, because we've been very clear about what kinds of commitments we expect, and we've been clear about those kinds of commitments for in excess of a year.
Differences remain on key details, including Tehran's future atomic research and the lifting of UN sanctions, which Iran Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei reportedly has demanded to be pulled immediately and completely. The two sides also want different documents at the end of this round of talks. Iran wants a general political statement, while the UN Security Council member countries plus Germany want to include detailed steps leading into the June 30th deadline. June is when a final agreement is to be reached.
Business partners face a one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Laah Hyun-kyung and Daniel Choy.
Arirang News. Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
Korea's exports are losing steam as the country's traditional growth engine. The contribution of outbound shipments to growth fell to a 5-year low last year due to sluggish demand abroad and falling global oil prices. Our Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Just 1.5 percentage points from Korea's 3.3% growth last year came from exports of goods and services. That equals a contribution to growth rate of around 45%, the lowest reading since 2009, right after the global financial crisis. The Bank of Korea data shows that the contribution rate shot up to over 200% in 2011, but has been on a downward trend since then. Now, concern is building over the recovery pace of Asia's export powerhouse, Korea, as demand at home also remains fragile.
China's slowing growth is a major uncertainty for Korean exports, which rely heavily on the world's second-largest economy. It's unlikely that the domestic economy will improve drastically this year compared to 2014.
Korea's exports actually dropped for the third straight month in March, with a decline from February to March logging the biggest slump in over 2 years. The government blames the fall on the drop of international oil costs, which are keeping prices low for petrochemical products, one of the major exporting items. But even if oil-related products are not counted, outbound shipments rose a mere 0.2% in March from the previous year, pointing to sluggish demand from consumers worldwide. The government says it will devise short-term measures like strengthening the competitiveness of local small and mid-sized exporters. But experts add that it's more critical to diversify and expand Korea's exporting market to the Middle East and South and Central America. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
More and more foreign customers are becoming interested in fashion and cosmetic products on Korean online shopping malls. And to get this trend going, the government is pushing to simplify the purchasing steps for international buyers. Our Song Ji-sun has this report.
Boosting foreign online sales of popular Korean items could give domestic manufacturers a big lift as they struggle in the face of slowing domestic demand. For example, Korean online shopping mall OKDGG.com reported that they carried 1 million items last year, tripling the numbers from 2013. Sales also escalated twofold to $8 million. The most popular goods were Korean fashion items like accessories and clothing, followed by cosmetics. Currently, foreign direct online purchases amount to less than half of Korea's online direct purchase total of $1 billion, but the government sees big potential in this export channel and wants to encourage overseas customers.
액티브 X와 같은 이런 낡은 규제에 안주한 결과 국내 소비자의 해외 직구는 폭발적으로 느는데 해외 소비자의 국내 역직구는 걸음마 수준입니다. 외국만큼 쉽게 결제할 수 있도록 규제를 완화해서 역직구가 활성화되면 이것도 수출 못지않은 효과를 거둘 수 있을 것입니다.
Many Korean websites require ActiveX to make online transactions. The security program only works on Microsoft's Internet Explorer web browser, meaning that customers using other platforms cannot shop on Korean sites. By 2017, the government's aim to make 90% of the top 100 private websites ActiveX free. In its place, they're promoting HTML5, which operates on all platforms. Analysts also point out the need to set up websites in various languages, as most of them only are currently operating in English, Chinese, and Japanese. 송지선, Arirang News.
9 hours. That's how long it took for Koreans to snap up pre-orders for Samsung's new Galaxy S6 and S6 Edge phones at SK Telecom, one of Korea's largest mobile carriers, on Wednesday. All of the 5,000 phones it had available for pre-order are off the shelf. Other telecom carriers LG, U+, and KT did not put a limit on pre-orders, but said they sold about the same number of phones as SK. 60% of SK buyers prefer the Galaxy S6 Edge over the S6 model. Color-wise, Gold Platinum was the most popular in both models. All three mobile carriers said they sold more pre-orders of the latest flagship phones than previous Galaxy models. The chairman of Korea's largest cosmetic maker, Amore Pacific Group, has become the country's second richest man in stock value. In the Bloomberg Billionaire Index released on Thursday, Seo Kyung-bae took the spot from vice chairman of tech giant Samsung Electronics, Lee Jae-yong. Seo's stocks were valued at $8 billion as of this past Tuesday, while E's stock stood at $7.5 billion. The change is due to the sharp rise of Amore Pacific's stocks this year. They grew nearly 40% between January and March. E's father and Samsung chairman Lee Gun-hee topped the country's billionaire list. His stocks valued at $12.8 billion.
A bipartisan committee of lawmakers will resume their negotiations on reforming Korea's pension system for public servants next Monday. The Special National Assembly Committee was launched late last year to supervise an overhaul of the system, which has become an increasing burden on the government's already strained finances. The chair of the special committee says he aims to submit a revised pension plan to the full assembly early next month. Korea's pension program for public officials has been in the red since the mid-1990s, and the shortfall has been topped up using taxpayer money. Officials say if the system continues in its current form, the government will have to use an extra $9 million in tax revenue per day from next year.
Korean police have unveiled their plans to make the roads safer and more stress-free for drivers and pedestrians alike. They are in the process of developing a system which will use traffic information posted on social media like Twitter and Facebook. Our Shin Se-min tells us more.
Millions more eyes will be on Korea's busy roads from later this year under a new police program. The National Police Agency says its 2015 traffic safety guide will be implemented in the second half of the year, and it'll have more of the focus on public participation. Under the new scheme, drivers will be able to report car accidents or heavily congested roads to the police via Twitter or Facebook. Once shared, the new program will automatically send notifications to drivers or dispatch officers to the scene if necessary. It'll also relay useful info to drivers using its so-called Urban Traffic Information System. Citizens will also be able to record and report traffic violations to the police instantly through a free mobile application. Mondays and Fridays will be designated traffic order enforcement days. On these days in particular, the police will keep an extra close eye on and crack down on drivers violating traffic signals, tailgating, and other traffic-related offenses through cameras located at crossroads. The number of automated cameras near so-called school zones will be expanded to 300 by 2017. Through the new measures, the National Police Agency says it hopes to cut down on road traffic accidents and free up traffic flow in Korea's major cities. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Koreans apparently spend an average of 3.7 hours a week on cooking, and that's not enough. The least amount of time among the 22 countries recently surveyed. Market and consumer researcher GfK, which surveyed over 27,000 people, says the global average is 6.5 hours. Topping the list are Indians and Ukrainians. They spend over 13 hours chopping and stirring, followed by South Africans, Indonesians, and Italians. Sweden, Belgium, and surprisingly, France joined Korea on the lower end of that ranking. The researchers say Korea's low weekly average may be explained by the wide range of affordable eating options like street food, delivery, and prepared meals. Shifting to a different topic now, well, maybe related in some sense, they could really cook up an appetite, work up an appetite, depending on what color you're staring at, and emotion, right? Colors, emotions, related to people. And for the late American artist Mark Rothko, colors were a chance to share his many, many feelings.
That's right. Well, if you're a fan of his works and are in Seoul, you'll want to pay attention to this next report because our Im Yun-hee takes us to an exciting new exhibition of Rothko originals.
Within this canvas, this window into the soul, what do you see? Mark Rothko saw emotions. He saw humanity. He saw a lot more than meets most eyes. As one of the most famous post-war artists, Rothko gained worldwide fame for his abstract expressionist style, his signature look that brought about a new type of art, an entirely new art experience. Rothko wanted to share his emotions with his audience, but not in the way his predecessors had. He created a style all his own.
There are two issues with the history of art. Realism portrays what the artist sees, and expressionism is used by artists to show their emotions. But Rothko was an abstract expressionist. He showed his emotions on the canvas with very little resemblance to reality. But even that doesn't justly describe him. If there's too much of oneself in the work, it's hard to understand for others. Rothko wanted to express, but also share his emotions and feelings with others.
The beginning of Rothko's career didn't look much different from any other artists of the era. He was largely influenced by other movements within the art realm, such as Surrealism and Expressionism. Early works contained scenes from society, and actual people as well. But as Rothko developed his style, his career matured, and a distinct style began to take shape. Figures and lines began disappearing, and colors and large shapes became more prominent. But as the paintings became less visually crowded, they became more emotionally charged, conveying Rothko's recurring thoughts about life. And towards the end of his career, overwhelmingly about death.
Within any painting, the lines and logistics must be considered, and colors are used to carry emotions. Rothko committed suicide in the 70s, but right before that, he made big wall murals with dark colors, and as a result, he had a breakdown. If you're not careful about looking at those particular wall murals, you could get very depressed. After drawing these, he had an emotional collapse, but this red painting was sort of a chance to revive himself. And while it seems brighter, it looks like the result of a deadly, bloody accident. In a way, this painting can be considered a failed effort.
The hours and hours it took Rothko to paint each piece was the amount of time he felt one needed to observe and fully understand his paintings. A quick glance doesn't reap the same experience as one that looks, reads, and feels a Rothko painting. Im Yun-hee, Arirang News.
Well, some of us here in Korea have been worried about drought lately, but that concern will dissolve with heavy rain in the forecast.
For details on that forecast, let's turn to our Michelle Park, who's standing by at the Weather Center. Michelle.
Good evening, guys. Although we had sunny skies during the day, clouds have slowly built up from the west, and now it's looking gray overhead. Now, there has been on and off precipitation here in the capital, but it's expected to get heavy anytime soon. The upper regions of Gangwon province will see heaviest rain, and while most of the regions, including Seoul, can expect between 10 to 40. Now, most of the rain should clear up by tomorrow morning, with temperatures still above the seasonal average. For the weekend, it's mostly cloudy, except in Chungcheong provinces, where we'll see another round of rain. Now, with that in mind, let's have a look at the readings for tomorrow. Seoul will start off the Friday morning at 9 and gets up to 16 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern regions such as Daegu and Busan will top to 23 and 22 degrees. Moving over to other regions, Jeju Island gets up to 18, Dokdo hits 16, while Mount Kumgang tops to 9 degrees. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for that, Michelle. That's the end of our newscast. Have a great start to your day if you're tuning in from different time zones. This has been Daniel Choy.
And I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. Have a good evening. If you're in Korea, see you again at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye for now.